My name is Zora Vance. For 10 long years, I was the shadow that kept Ji-hoon Park alive. I have taken bullets that were meant for him, and I have scars on my skin that tell the story of a love I thought was forever. I gave him my youth, my blood, and my heart, believing we were two souls against the world. But as I stood in the back of his glittering engagement party, I realized the man I called my home was actually my jailer. He didn't just love me, he was using that love to hide a truth so big it would have set me free a long time ago. He kept me small so he could keep me close. And tonight, the weight of his lies finally broke me. If you can feel the sting of a heart being shattered by the one person it trusted most, don't turn away now. Subscribe to walk this path of fire and justice with Zora, or leave her to face the darkness alone. The air in the park estate was heavy with the scent of expensive lilies and the cold, metallic tang of betrayal. I stood against the marble pillar, my black suit a sharp contrast to the sea of white silk and diamonds filling the room. My eyes never left Ji-hoon. He looked like a king in his velvet tuxedo, laughing with men who dealt in death as easily as they dealt in gold. Beside him stood the woman everyone called the Heiress. She was beautiful, dressed in a gown that cost more than I had earned in a decade of bleeding for him. But when I looked at her, my skin crawled with a strange, haunting familiarity I couldn't explain. I waited until the toasts were finished before I slipped into his private study. The room smelled like him, sandalwood and old secrets. When he walked in a few minutes later, he didn't look surprised to see me. He never was. He moved toward me with that predatory grace that used to make my heart race, but tonight it only made me feel cold. "The engagement is tomorrow, Ji-hoon," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. "A shadow cannot stand beside a married man. I'm done. I'm resigning." The room went silent, the only sound being the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Ji-hoon didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared at me with those obsidian eyes that I once thought held the stars. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek with a tenderness that felt like a knife wound. "You aren't going anywhere, Zora," he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You belong to the Park Syndicate. You belong to me. You are the only thing in this world I have ever truly owned." "I have given you 10 years of my life," I choked out, a single tear escaping despite my pride. "I have no family, no home, and no future because I gave it all to you. Isn't that enough? Why do you want to keep a ghost in your house?" He stepped closer, pinning me against the dark wood of his desk, his scent filling my lungs until I couldn't breathe. "It is never enough. You think the world outside these walls is kind? You think you have somewhere to go? Without me, Zora, you are nothing but a target." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, but he didn't open it for me. He set it on the desk between us, like a barrier. "If you want your freedom so badly, you will earn it one last time. There is an underground auction tonight. A red diamond is being sold, a family heirloom the Che family is desperate to get back. Give it to my fiancé. Give her the prize she wants, and I will consider letting you walk away." I looked at him, searching for even a flicker of the man who used to hold me in the dark and promise me the world. But all I saw was a stranger who was asking me to bleed one more time for the woman who was taking my place. I didn't know then that the diamond held the key to my past. I didn't know that every word out of his mouth was a brick in a wall he had built to keep me from my throne. "One last time," I whispered, my heart finally going numb. "And then I'm gone." He leaned down, his lips brushing my ear, sending a shiver of pure agony through my soul. "We'll see, Zora. Some debts can never be paid in full." As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of a file left open on his desk, a grainy photograph of a little girl with my eyes, sitting in a garden I almost remembered. He saw my gaze and closed the file instantly, his face turning back into a mask of stone. I walked out into the rain, the cold water washing away my tears, wondering why the man who claimed to love me looked so terrified of me finding out who I actually was. Who was the girl in the photo, and why did Ji-hoon look like he had just seen a ghost? The air in the arena smelled of copper, sweat, and the cold indifference of the rich people watching from the balconies. I stood in the center of the ring, my ribs screaming with every breath, my eyes fixed on the man who sent me here. Ji-hoon sat in the VIP booth, his face a mask of stone, his hand draped casually over the chair of the woman who wore my stolen smile. He told me this was for her, the true Heiress. He told me if I won this red diamond, he would let me go. But as the crowd roared, all I could feel was the weight of 10 years of devotion being traded for a shiny rock. My opponent was a mountain of a man, a champion who didn't care that I was half his size or that I had spent the last decade bleeding to keep my soul intact. The first blow caught me in the stomach, knocking the air from my lungs and sending me to my knees. Through the haze of pain, I looked up at the booth. I expected to see worry in Ji-hoon's eyes. I expected to see the man who used to hold me when I had nightmares, the man who whispered that he was my entire world. But he didn't flinch. He just sipped his drink, watching me like I was a toy that was finally beginning to break. I forced myself up. I had to, not for the diamond and not even for my freedom, because I realized if I died here, I would die as nothing but his shadow. I fought with a desperation that felt like fire in my veins. I took hits that would have killed a normal woman, my vision blurring, my blood staining the canvas. Every time I hit the floor, I thought of the way he used to kiss my scars. Now he was the one giving me new ones. In the final round, I found a spark of pure, white-hot rage. I struck with everything I had left, a tactical strike that sent the giant crashing down. The arena went silent for a heartbeat before exploding into cheers. I had won. I stood there, swaying, my face a mess of purple bruises and crimson streaks, reaching out for the velvet box containing the Eye of the Orient. But as the referee raised my hand, the pain in my lower abdomen sharpened into a jagged blade. It was a cold, tearing sensation that made the world go dark around the edges. I collapsed, clutching my stomach, feeling a warmth spread that had nothing to do with the heat of the fight. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the doctor's voice, cold, clinical, and devastating. The damage was too much. The internal bleeding, the blunt force trauma. I would never be able to carry a child. The future I had secretly imagined, a quiet life, a baby with my eyes, and maybe a kinder version of Ji-hoon's heart, was gone. Ji-hoon finally moved. He descended from the booth, but he didn't go to the medical tent. He walked straight to the pedestal, picked up the red diamond, and handed it to the fake Heiress. She squealed with delight, pressing her cheek against his arm. Only then did he turn to look at me, lying broken on the floor. "You did well, Zora," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth that used to be my only comfort. "You earned her gift. Rest now." He turned his back on me, walking away with a woman who had everything, while I was left with nothing but the silence of a hollow womb and a heart that had finally stopped beating for him. He didn't look back, not once. And as the lights in the arena began to dim, I realized the man I had saved 1,000 times had finally succeeded in destroying me. I was free, but I was empty, a queen of a kingdom that no longer existed, left to bleed out in the dark while he celebrated with a ghost. My body was a map of broken promises, and the ink was my own blood. After the fight, I didn't think I could feel any more pain. I was wrong. The news that I would never hold a child of my own had left a hollow space in my chest that no amount of air could fill. I was a ghost walking through the halls of the park estate, waiting for the day I could finally disappear. But Ji-hoon wasn't done with me. He never was. The call came in the middle of a storm that sounded like the sky was screaming. Ji-hoon had been taken. My heart, the traitorous thing that still beat for him despite everything, surged with a terrifying panic. The men who took him didn't want money. They wanted to see me break. They gave an address, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city, and told me to come alone. When I arrived, the air was freezing and smelled of damp earth. Ji-hoon was there, just like in the video. Between us lay a 10-foot path of rusted, jagged nails, their points shimmering under the dim, flickering light. If you want him, Zora, you walk. No shoes, no weapons, just your love against the steel. A voice hissed from the shadows. I looked at Ji-hoon. He looked so small, so vulnerable. I forgot about the red diamond. I forgot about the woman who was wearing my heritage. All I saw was the man who pulled me out of the darkness 10 years ago. I kicked off my boots. The first step felt like a lightning bolt of agony shooting through my entire frame. I gasped, my hands shaking as I balanced myself. The second step was worse. I felt the cold metal pierce my skin, reaching for the bone. Step by step, I dragged myself toward him. Each movement left a crimson footprint on the concrete. I was crying, not just from the physical torture, but because even now, after he had destroyed my future, I was still willing to bleed to keep him breathing. I reached him, my feet shredded and raw, and collapsed at his feet. I fumbled with his ropes, my fingers slick with my own blood. "I've got you," I sobbed, pulling him into my arms. "I've got you, Ji-hoon. I'm here." But as I held him, I felt his body go stiff. He didn't hug me back. He didn't say thank you. Instead, he stood up with a strength that didn't belong to a man who had been beaten. He looked down at my mangled feet, then at the kidnappers who were now stepping out of the shadows, laughing and tucking their guns into their waistbands. They weren't his enemies, they were his men. 10 feet, Ji-hoon said, his voice as cold as the rain outside. He checked his watch, his face completely calm. "You did it in under 3 minutes. I suppose your loyalty is still intact, despite your little resignation speech." The world tilted. I looked from the rusted nails to his clean, unbruised hands. He hadn't been kidnapped. He had staged the entire thing. He had watched me mutilate myself just to test if I was still his loyal dog. He had watched me scream in pain, knowing I was already mourning the children I would never have, just to see if I would still crawl through hell for him. You did this?" I whispered, my voice breaking into 1,000 pieces. "I walked on nails for a lie?" Ji-hoon reached down and grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. His eyes were burning with a terrifying, possessive fire. "I had to be sure, Zara. The Che family is moving. I can't have a bodyguard whose heart is half out the door. You proved tonight that you still belong to me. Now let's get you home." He turned to walk away, expecting me to follow him on my ruined feet. I stayed on the floor, the blood pooling around me, looking at the man I had loved for a decade. I realized then that he didn't love me at all. He loved the power he had to make me suffer. He was keeping me in his shadow, not to protect me, to make sure I never realized I was the one who actually held the light. "Ji-hoon?" I called out softly. He stopped, but he didn't turn around. "What else are you hiding?" I asked, my voice hollow and dead. "Because if you're willing to do this for a test, what did you do to my life before I met you?" He didn't answer. He just kept walking, leaving me alone in the dark with the smell of my own blood and a question that felt like a death sentence. How much of my memory was real, and how much was just another path of nails he had laid out for me to walk? The wounds on my feet were still weeping, each step a reminder of the nails I had walked on for a man who didn't exist. But physical pain was a mercy compared to the coldness in Ji-hoon's eyes as he dressed me for the evening. He didn't use a stylist. He insisted on picking the dress himself. a deep, regal purple that felt too heavy for my tired body. "Smile, Zara," he whispered, his hands lingering on my waist. "It's Nora's birthday. The Che family will be there. You must look like the perfect loyal shadow." The gala was a sea of gold and arrogance. I stood 2 paces behind Jihoon, my face a mask of professional distance, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. Nora, the woman everyone believed was the Che heiress, was the center of the room. She was draped in diamonds, laughing with a couple who stood at the head of the table. They were the elders of the Che dynasty, my biological parents, though I didn't know it then. I only knew that when I looked at the woman, a strange primal ache twisted in my gut. Her eyes were my eyes. Her hands, delicate and steady, moved just like mine. Jihoon led us toward them. I expected a formal introduction, but instead he stopped and looked at Nora with a cruel smirk. "Nora, darling, I brought you a gift. My bodyguard here has been a bit difficult lately. She needs to learn her place before the wedding." The room went quiet. I felt the blood drain from my face. My parents, the people who should have been searching for me for 20 years, looked at me not with love, but with disgust. To them, I was just a lowly servant from the park syndicate, a girl of no consequence. "She has an attitude, doesn't she?" Nora laughed, stepping closer. She reached out and flicked a stray hair from my shoulder, her eyes full of malice. "Maybe she needs to be reminded who she serves." In a move that felt like a nightmare, Nora raised her hand and slapped me. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom. My head snapped to the side. I didn't fight back. I couldn't. I looked at the man and woman standing behind her, my mother and father. I waited for them to stop it. I waited for the human instinct to protect a girl being bullied to kick in. Instead, my mother narrowed her eyes. "She looks far too proud for a bodyguard. If she cannot respect the heiress of our bloodline, she should be taught a lesson in humility." Jihoon stepped back, crossing his arms, giving them permission. For the next 10 minutes, I became the entertainment for the elite. Nora forced me to my knees in the middle of the ballroom. She poured wine over my head, the red liquid staining the purple silk Jihoon had chosen for me. The guests laughed. My father turned his back, sipping his champagne as if my muffled sobs were just background music. My mother watched with a cold, detached curiosity, never once recognizing the daughter she had lost. I looked up at Jihoon, pleading with my eyes for him to end this. He knew. He knew who they were. He knew they were my flesh and blood, and he was letting them break me. He was standing there watching my own mother and father participate in my public shaming just to ensure I felt so worthless that I would never dream of claiming my real name. When it was over, I was a broken heap on the marble floor, smelling of sour wine and salt. Jihoon finally knelt beside me, his touch deceptively soft as he wiped a tear from my bruised cheek. "See, Zara?" he whispered, so only I could hear. "Even your own kind doesn't want you. Only I love you. Only I keep you." He helped me up, but I felt like a hollow shell. As we walked away, I heard my mother's voice behind us, complaining about the trash the Parks brought into their home. I didn't know that she was talking about her own child. I didn't know that Jihoon had orchestrated this entire humiliation to make me hate the people I was meant to lead. But as we reached the car, I felt something in the pocket of the dress Jihoon had picked for me for the evening. It was a small, crumpled piece of paper, a DNA report with my name and the Che family seal. My heart stopped. He hadn't just picked this dress for the color. He had hidden the truth in my pocket so I would find it only after I had been destroyed by the people I belonged to. I looked at the back of Jihoon's head as he drove us into the night. He was humming a soft tune. He let my parents beat me. He let them hate me. Why would a man who loves me want me to be hated by the world? And if he knew the truth, why was he still taking me back to his prison? The DNA report felt like a piece of lead in my pocket, pulling me down toward the floor of the Park estate. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, the words biological daughter of the Che dynasty burned into my retinas. The woman who had slapped me, the man who looked at me like garbage, they were the ones who had given me life. And Ji-hoon had known. Every time he kissed me, every time he bandaged a wound I received protecting him, he was holding the key to my cage and choosing to keep it locked. Today was his wedding day. The house was a whirlwind of white flowers and expensive silk, a celebration of a union built on the bones of my identity. I watched from the hallway as Ji-hoon adjusted his cufflinks. He looked breathtaking, a king preparing to claim a throne that didn't belong to him. He saw me in the mirror and smiled, that same soft, lying smile that used to make me feel safe. "Zara," he whispered, his voice smooth as velvet, "you look pale. Stay in the shadows today. It's almost over." "It is over," I whispered, but he wasn't listening. He never really listened to the girl he thought he owned. I didn't go to the ceremony to protect him. I went to end the girl I used to be. As the priest spoke about honor and forever, I stood at the back of the chapel, my hand trembling against the cold stone wall. When it was time for the gift to be presented to the bride, I didn't bring the red diamond. I walked down the aisle, my ruined feet screaming in pain, each step a reminder of the nails he made me walk for. A lie. The room went silent as I reached the altar. The Che parents looked at me with that familiar disgust, but I didn't flinch this time. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the DNA report, the one Ji-hoon had hidden in my dress at the gala. I didn't hand it to Ji-hoon. I handed it to the woman who claimed to be my mother. "A gift from the shadow," I said, my voice echoing in the hollow silence of the church. I watched her eyes scan the page. I watched the color drain from her face as she looked from the paper to my eyes and back again. She gasped, a sound of pure, raw horror. Beside her, my father grabbed the report, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. The imposter, the woman Ji-hoon was supposed to marry, tried to grab it, but the Che matriarch pushed her away with a force that sent her stumbling. Ji-hoon's face didn't break. He didn't look guilty. He looked at me with a terrifying, dark obsession, as if he was impressed that I had finally found the courage to burn the world down. "Zora," he warned, stepping toward me. "Don't touch me." And for the first time in 10 years, he actually stopped. "You didn't just steal my life, Ji-hoon. You let me believe I was alone so you could be my everything. You let my own mother hit me while you watched. You were not my savior. You were the monster I was protecting the world from." I turned my back on the gasps of the Che family, on the weeping of the woman who finally realized she had tortured her own daughter, and on the man who had been my entire universe. I walked out of the church, leaving the heiress to be stripped of her stolen crown and the Parks to face the wrath of a dynasty they had betrayed. I didn't take a car. I just walked until my feet bled again, until the white church was a speck in the distance. I was a queen with no kingdom, a daughter with no home, and a woman with no heart left to give. I had exposed the truth, but as the rain started to fall, soaking my thin clothes, I realized I had nowhere to go. I had broken my chains, but I was still standing in the middle of a graveyard. I stood at the edge of the city bridge, looking at the dark water below. The truth didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral. I had destroyed him, but in the process, I had realized there was nothing left of me to save. If I wasn't his bodyguard, and I wasn't their daughter, then who was the girl crying in the rain? I was a queen without a throne, wandering through a world that suddenly felt too big and too cold. After I left that wedding chapel, the name Zora Vance felt like a heavy coat I needed to shed. I didn't go back to the Park estate. I didn't go to the Che mansion. Instead, I boarded a bus heading south, my feet wrapped in blood-stained bandages and my heart locked in a box I promised never to open again. For weeks, I lived like a ghost, moving from one neon-lit city to the next, until I found a place where the air smelt of salt, and nobody knew the name Ji-hoon Park. The news reached me through a flickering television in a small, lonely diner. The screen showed the fall of a kingdom. The park syndicate was being dismantled piece by piece. Ji-hoon's father had been arrested, and the fake heiress, Nora, had vanished into the night after the Che family stripped her of everything. The headlines called it the betrayal of the decade. I watched as they showed a clip of Ji-hoon being led out of a building. He looked thinner, his eyes hollow and dark, but even through the grainy footage, I could see him looking at the cameras as if he were searching for me. I turned the TV off. I didn't want his regret. I didn't want his ruin. I just wanted to forget the way his hands felt when he was lying to me. I took a job at a quiet shipping dock under the name Eva. I traded my tactical gear for heavy flannels and my gun for a clipboard. It was honest work, the kind of work that made my muscles ache in a way that had nothing to do with violence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder for an assassin. I was just a woman watching the sunset over the water. But the world is small when you have enemies in high places. One evening, as the docks were closing, a black car pulled up. My heart hammered against my ribs, that old familiar fear. I reached for a heavy iron tool, my body sliding into a defensive stance I thought I had forgotten. But the man who stepped out wasn't one of Ji-hoon's guards. He was older, dressed in an expensive suit that didn't belong in a place like this. He looked at me with eyes that were wet with unshed tears. "Zora," he whispered. It was my father, the man who had watched me be humiliated at the gala, the man who had turned his back while his wife hit me. "My name is Eva," I said, my voice as hard as the concrete beneath us, "and you're trespassing." He took a step forward, his hands trembling. "We've been searching for you. Your mother, she hasn't stopped crying since the wedding. We found the record, Zora. We know what the Parks did. We know they stole you from that park in Chicago when you were 6 years old. We were told you were dead." I felt a sharp, cold sting in my chest. Stole me. Ji-hoon's family hadn't rescued me from the cold. They had created the cold so they could play the heroes. Every saving moment in my life had been a staged act in a play I never signed up for. "I don't care," I said, though my voice broke. "You watched them hurt me. You watched Nora pour wine on my head, and you did nothing. You didn't recognize your own blood because you were too busy looking at my uniform." "We were blind," he sobbed, reaching out as if to touch my arm. "But you can make it right. The Che dynasty is yours. We've frozen the park assets. We are going to destroy Ji-hoon for what he did to you. Come home and help us bury him." I looked at the water, thinking of the man who had been my entire world. Ji-hoon was being hunted by the very family he had tried to infiltrate through me. He was losing his power, his money, and his legacy. The revenge I had dreamed of was finally happening. My parents were offering me a crown on a silver platter, and all I had to do was say yes to see Ji-hoon suffer the way I had. But as I looked at my father's desperate face, I realized that these people weren't my home either. They loved the heiress, but they hated the bodyguard. "Do you want to bury him?" I asked, my voice hollow. "He's already dead. He died the moment I realized he never loved me." I turned to walk away, but my father's next words stopped me cold. "He's not just losing his business, Zora. The internal council, the uncles, they've put a price on his head to cover their own tracks. He won't survive the week. Is that what you want? To let him die alone in the dark?" I stood frozen, the clipboard slipping from my numb fingers. I hated him. I hated him for the nails, for the fight, for the stolen years. But as the image of Ji-hoon being executed filled my mind, a terrifying, agonizing question clawed at my soul. If I let him kill him, was I any better than the monster he had tried to make me? Or was my heart still so broken that I couldn't bear the thought of a world where he didn't exist, even if he was the one who destroyed me? The sirens of Seoul were a distant, mournful wail compared to the roar of the fire consuming the Che dynasty's flagship skyscraper. I stood in the center of the penthouse, the heat blistering my skin and the smoke clawing at my throat. My own family, the uncles who had spent decades waiting for a chance to steal the crown, had finally struck. They didn't want the long-lost daughter. They wanted a martyr. They had locked the executive elevators and set the lower floors ablaze, leaving me to burn in the very throne room I had just reclaimed. I slumped against the mahogany desk, my lungs burning. I had spent 10 years protecting a man who lied to me, and the moment I found my real family, they tried to kill me. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth, sharper than the smoke. I closed my eyes, thinking of the girl who used to believe in heroes. She was long dead, buried under nails and boxing rings. Suddenly, the private express elevator, the one that required a bypass code only the park syndicate possessed, chimed. The doors groaned open, and a figure emerged through the wall of gray soot. My heart stopped. It was Ji-hoon. He didn't look like the intouchable mafia boss anymore. His expensive suit was shredded and blackened, his face streaked with blood and ash. And in his hands, he wasn't carrying a weapon or a briefcase. He was clutching my old tactical gear and the worn leather haulers I had used for a decade. He looked like he had crawled through the very center of the sun to find me. "Zora," he choked out, stumbling toward me. "Get away from me," I coughed, pulling a shard of glass from the floor to hold between us. "Did you come to watch me die, or did your father send you to finish what the uncle started?" He didn't stop. He walked right into the point of the glass, letting it pierce his palm as he reached for my shoulders. "I don't care about my father. I don't care about the parks. I burned the estate, Zora. I gave the Che uncles the coordinates to our main vault just to distract their guards so I could get to this building. Everything. I built it. I turned it to ash for 5 minutes of power to get this elevator to move." He fell to his knees in front of me, forcing the tactical gear into my lap. "Put it on. The roof is the only way out. My helicopter is waiting. We have to move now." I looked at the gear, the armor that had once been my skin. "Why?" I whispered, the tears finally breaking through the soot on my cheeks. "You lied to me for 10 years. You kept me as a slave while I was a queen. Why save me now?" Ji-hoon leaned his forehead against mine, his breath shaking. "Because I was a coward, Zora. I thought if you knew you were a queen, you'd realize you didn't need a monster like me. I caged you because I was terrified of being alone in the dark. But I'd rather die in this fire knowing you're safe than live 1,000 years in a world where you don't breathe." He grabbed my hand, his grip crushing and desperate. Outside, the glass began to shatter from the heat, the sound like 1,000 screams. He pulled me toward the service stairs, his body shielding mine from the falling embers. As we reached the roof, the wind whipped around us, smelling of gasoline and ending. He pushed me toward the hovering helicopter, but as I reached the door, he let go. He didn't jump in. He stood on the edge of the burning roof, the fire reflecting in his obsidian eyes, a look of profound, agonizing peace on his face. "Go, Zora," he shouted over the roar of the blades. "Claim your throne. I'm the last piece of your past that needs to burn." I reached out, my fingers brushing his tattered sleeve, but the pilot pulled the lever. The gap between us grew, 1 foot, 5 feet, 10. I looked down at the man who had been my jailer, my lover, and now my sacrifice. He stood there, a solitary figure against the inferno, choosing to stay in the flames so I could fly. "Ji-hoon," I screamed, but the wind swallowed his name. As the helicopter climbed higher, I looked at the tactical vest in my lap. Tucked into the side pocket was a small, scorched photograph.
It wasn't the one of me as a child. It was a photo of us, taken years ago in the rain, before the lies became too heavy. On the back, in his elegant, sharp handwriting, were only 4 words. I loved you first. My heart, the one I thought was stone, shattered into a million pieces. If he really loved me, why did he let the fire get this high? And if I survived this night, would I ever be able to breathe without the scent of his smoke in my hair? The walls of the safe house were peeling and damp, smelling of old rain and the metallic tang of blood. Outside, the world was still hunting us, but inside this small, dark room, time seemed to stand still. Ji-hoon lay on the narrow cot, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. I moved my hands over his chest, cleaning the deep burns he had taken from me in the fire. The roles were reversed now. The bodyguard was tending to the master, but the master was no longer a king. He was just a man, broken and bleeding, because he had chosen to burn his empire down to save my life. "Don't move," I whispered, my voice thick with a knot of emotion I couldn't untie. My fingers trembled as I pressed a cool cloth to his shoulder. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to remember the nails, the boxing ring, and the cold way he had watched my parents humiliate me. But every time I looked at the fresh scars on his arms, scars he got pulling me from that penthouse, the anger felt like a fire that had run out of fuel. Ji-hoon reached up, his hand weak and shaking, and caught my wrist. His skin was fever hot. "Zora," he rasped, his eyes searching mine with a desperation that broke my heart. I know saying sorry is like trying to put out a forest fire with a cup of water, but you have to know, I never touched her, Nora. I never even looked at her when the doors were closed. I froze, the cloth dripping water onto the floor. You were going to marry her, Ji-hoon. You were going to give her my name, my life. "It was a shield," he croaked out, coughing until blood flecked his lips. "The Che Council, your uncles, they knew there was a missing girl. They were hunting for her. If they had found you, they would have killed you before you could ever say your own name. I brought Nora in as a decoy. I made the world believe she was the one, so they would aim their knives at her, not you. I kept you low. I kept you as my bodyguard, because as long as the world thought you were just a Black American girl with no past, you were safe. I made myself the villain in your story, just to make sure your story didn't end in a grave." I let out a sob I had been holding back for years. It was a sound of pure, raw agony. "But you let them break my body, Ji-hoon. You let them take away my chance to be a mother." He closed his eyes, a tear tracking through the soot on his temple. I had to make it look real. If I had been too kind, my father would have suspected it. If you hadn't fought, they would have questioned why I kept you. I hated myself every second. Every strike you took, I felt it in my soul. I would burn in hell 1,000 times over just to hear you breathe for one more day. I hid your crown because I knew that the moment you put it on, everyone wanted your head. I just wanted you to be mine, and I wanted you to stay alive. I looked at this man, this beautiful, monstrous man who loved me by destroying me. He had sacrificed his reputation, his family, and his entire future to build a wall around me made of lies and pain. He had played a game of chess with our lives, and he had lost everything just so I could win. "You should have told me," I whispered, leaning my forehead against his. "We could have fought together. You would have died together with me," he murmured, his voice fading as the fever took hold. He drifted into a fitful sleep, his hand still clutching mine, as if he were afraid I would vanish the moment he let go. I sat there in the dark, listening to his labored breathing, torn between the woman who wanted to run away and the woman who wanted to pull him into her arms and never let go. He had protected me, but he had also stolen my choice. He had given me my life back, but it was a life haunted by the ghost of the family I could never have. I looked at the door of the safe house. I could leave right now. I could go back to the Che dynasty and rule as a queen. But as I looked back at Ji-hoon, I realized that the crown I was meant to wear felt cold and empty compared to the warmth of his hand. If the man who destroyed me was the only one who truly knew me, could I ever really be free? Or was I just trading one cage for another, where the bars were made of a love that was too heavy to carry? The morning sun rose over Seoul like a promise kept after a lifetime of storms. I stood in the center of the grand ballroom, the very place where my humiliation was a sport for the elite months ago. But today, the air didn't smell like spilled wine and shame. It smelled of expensive incense and the terrifying sense of absolute power. I was no longer wearing the tactical vest of a servant. I wore a gown of midnight silk, and the Che family crest hung heavy and cold around my neck. I was the sovereign. I was the queen they had tried to bury. And today, I was the one holding the shovel. My uncles, the men who locked the doors while the building burned, sat in the front row, their faces pale and sweating. With a single flick of my wrist, I watched as my guards, the men who now swore their lives to me, led them away to a darkness they would never return from. I didn't feel the joy I thought I would. I only felt a deep, quiet stillness. I had executed my enemies, but the throne still felt like a solitary island in a very large ocean. Then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall groaned open. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Ji-hoon walked down the long aisle, his gait slow and slightly uneven from the injuries he would haunt him forever. He wasn't dressed as a mafia boss. He wore a simple, dark suit, his head bowed, his hands empty. He didn't stop until he reached the foot of my throne. To the shock of every noble in the room, the man who once owned the city dropped to both knees. He didn't look up at me. He placed his forehead against the cold marble floor, a gesture of total and absolute surrender. "I am here for my sentence, my queen," he whispered, his voice vibrating through the floorboards and into my very bones. I looked down at the man who loved me by destroying me, the man who lied to me to keep me alive. I reached into the hidden pocket of my gown and pulled out the red diamond, the Eye of the Orient. I didn't throw it at him. I held it out in the light, watching the crimson facets bleed shadows on the floor. "You think you're the only one who can play a long game, Ji-hoon?" I asked, my voice steady, but my heart breaking in my chest. He finally looked up, his obsidian eyes wide with confusion. "I knew," I whispered, leaning forward so only he could hear. "I knew about the decoy. I knew why you made me walk on those nails. I let you think I was the victim so I could see exactly how much you were willing to lose for me. I let you think you were in control while I watched you burn your father's world down to the ground just to reach my elevator. You wanted to protect me from the light, Ji-hoon, but I've always known how to navigate the dark." His breath hitched, a sob racking his broad shoulders. He realized then that he hadn't saved a helpless girl. He had been serving a queen who was testing his soul. "Get up," I commanded. I stood from the throne and held out my hand. "I am the head of the Che dynasty, and I do not rule alone. From this day forward,